Family Guy might be one of the most recognizable adult animated comedies ever created. 24 seasons, over 400 episodes. A show that basically invented a new kind of humor built on cutaway gags, inappropriate jokes, and a fat guy from Rhode Island who somehow became one of the most iconic characters in television history. Peter Griffin falling down and holding his knee for 30 straight seconds. Quagmire saying giggity at completely inappropriate moments. Stewie building ray guns in his bedroom, while his parents have absolutely no idea what's going on. That's the Family Guy everyone knows. That's the show people put on in the background while they're eating dinner or scrolling their phones. But here's the thing. Underneath all the chicken fights and the Conway Twitty cutaways and the gags about Meg being the worst person alive, Family Guy has produced some genuinely terrifying television. And not terrifying in the way you'd expect from an animated comedy. We're not talking about cartoon ghosts or silly Halloween costumes. We're talking about a baby getting shot in the chest by his own mother. A beloved character bleeding out on the street from a random car accident while his family watches him die. An entire episode dedicated to showing domestic abuse, so realistic that critics couldn't decide if the show was being brave or exploitative. Santa Claus begging a baby to kill him because he can't take the suffering anymore. A murder mystery where recurring characters are permanently killed off, confirmed dead by the creator himself, never coming back. Family Guy doesn't just cross lines. Sometimes it erases them completely, and you're left sitting there at 2 a.m. wondering what you just watched on a show that 5 minutes ago had a joke about Peter trying to marry his own son. That's the trick Family Guy has been pulling for over 2 decades. It builds a reputation as the dumb show, the offensive show, the show your parents hate, and then it weaponizes that reputation against you. Because when you sit down to watch the dumb show, your emotional defenses are at zero. You're not bracing for impact. You're not preparing yourself for something that's going to stay with you for days. You're just watching a cartoon. And that's exactly when the show decides to show you something you'll never forget. The episodes we're about to break down span the entire history of the series. Some of them are from the earliest seasons, when the show was still figuring out what it could get away with. Others are from the modern era, when the writers had clearly stopped asking for permission and started doing whatever they wanted. What connects all of them is a willingness to commit. When Family Guy goes dark, it doesn't dip its toe in. It doesn't test the water and pull back. It dives in head first and stays under until the audience is gasping for air. And the results, as you're about to see, range from deeply unsettling to genuinely horrifying to something that borders on irresponsible. These aren't ranked in any particular order. They're arranged to take you on a journey through the different kinds of horror that Family Guy has explored over its 24 seasons. Body horror, psychological horror, emotional devastation, moral horror, the kind of terror that comes from watching people you thought you knew reveal who they really are when nobody's looking. In this video, we're going deep into the most terrifying episodes in both classic and modern Family Guy. From the early seasons that first showed audiences, this show was capable of real darkness, all the way through the modern era, where the writers seem to have completely stopped pretending they have any limits at all. Some of these episodes are famous for being disturbing. Others are ones that flew under the radar, episodes that most people watched, laughed at uncomfortably, and then tried very hard to forget about. And here's what makes it even more unsettling. Most of these episodes aren't labelled as Halloween specials. They're not behind a content warning. They don't come with any kind of signal that says, hey, this one's different. Maybe don't watch it while you're eating. They just show up in the middle of a regular season, sandwiched between an episode about Peter starting a business and an episode about Quagmire dating someone inappropriate. You're channel surfing, you land on Family Guy, you're expecting the usual 20 minutes of dumb fun, and suddenly you're watching a scene that belongs in a psychological thriller. The show doesn't warn you. It doesn't ease you in. It just does it. And that ambush quality, that complete refusal to let the audience prepare themselves for what they're about to see, is a huge part of why these episodes hit as hard as they do. You never see it coming. By the time you realise the tone has shifted, you're already in too deep to look away. But before we dive in, make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Let's start with an episode from the early days, Season 2, a time when Family Guy was still finding its voice, still figuring out exactly how far it could push things. And the answer, apparently, was really far. Because in only its second season, this show decided to destroy the entire world. You remember the Y2K panic, right? The idea that when the clock struck midnight on January 1st, 2000, every computer on the planet was going to malfunction and society was going to collapse. In the real world, nothing happened. People drank champagne, watched fireworks, and woke up the next morning to a world that looked exactly the same as the one they'd gone to sleep in. But in the Family Guy universe, Y2K actually delivers on every single one of its promises, and the results are absolutely horrifying. Darboom from Season 2 starts with Peter doing what Peter does best, overreacting to something he doesn't understand. He's convinced that Y2K is going to end civilization, so he starts hoarding food and supplies in the basement while Lois rolls her eyes, and everyone else in Quahog goes about their normal lives. Classic Peter paranoia, right? You're supposed to laugh at him. He's being ridiculous. But then midnight hits, and the world actually ends. Think about that for a second. The show sets you up to laugh at Peter for being an idiot, and then it turns out he was right. The nuclear missiles launch. The infrastructure collapses. Quahog becomes a wasteland. And suddenly you're not watching a comedy anymore. You're watching the Griffin family try to survive in a post-apocalyptic hellscape. And the show commits to it in a way that genuinely catches you off guard. The family sets out on foot through the ruins of civilization, looking for food. They're starving. The roads are destroyed. Buildings are crumbling. And this is where the body horror starts. Because the nuclear fallout doesn't just destroy buildings, it mutates people. Joe Swanson, the tough cop in the wheelchair, who's been a reliable presence in the show up to this point, transforms into a grotesque octopus creature. His body warps and stretches in ways that the animators clearly had way too much fun designing. Other residents of Quahog undergo similar transformations, turning into these twisted versions of themselves that look like something out of a David Cronenberg film. What makes it so unsettling is the contrast. 5 minutes ago, you were watching Peter argue with Lois about canned beans. Now you're watching a man's body mutate into something that barely resembles a human being. And the show is playing it with just enough humour to keep you watching, but just enough horror to make you genuinely uncomfortable. The family eventually finds a Twinkie factory, because of course Peter Griffin would survive the apocalypse by finding junk food. And this is where the episode takes on a whole different kind of darkness. Peter decides he's going to be the leader of a new society built around this factory. He calls it New Quahog. And for a brief moment, it actually works. People gather together. They start rebuilding. There's hope. But Peter is Peter. His narcissism, his incompetence, his complete inability to think about anyone other than himself, it all kicks in immediately. He makes terrible decisions. He abuses his power. He drives people away. And the new society collapses. Not because of the nuclear fallout or the mutations or any external threat, but because Peter Griffin is fundamentally incapable of leadership. The real horror of the episode isn't the apocalypse. It's watching how quickly human beings turn on each other when the structures of civilization disappear, and how the worst impulses of the worst people rise to the top. The episode eventually reveals that the whole thing was a fantasy or a vision, depending on how you interpret it. But that doesn't undo what you just watched. For 20 minutes, Family Guy showed you what these characters would actually be like if the world ended? And the answer is pretty grim. Peter would be a dictator. The weak would be left behind. The strong would mutate into monsters, and hope would die the moment someone selfish enough got their hands on a little bit of power. Darboom aired in 1999, when Family Guy was barely a year old. The show was still establishing what it was. And what it chose to establish right there in season 2 was that nothing was off limits. Not nuclear war, not body horror, not the complete collapse of human civilization. If the writers thought it would be funny, or interesting, or shocking, they were going to do it, and audiences got the message loud and clear. What's really interesting about Darboom is how it compares to the way other shows handled the exact same premise. The Simpsons did a Y2K joke that lasted about 30 seconds. South Park referenced it in passing. Other animated comedies treated Y2K as what it turned out to be in reality, a non-event worth a quick laugh. Family Guy was the only one that said, "What if it actually happened?" and then spent an entire episode exploring the answer with complete sincerity. And the body horror isn't just throwaway visual gags. Each mutation is designed to say something about the character. Joe, the disabled cop who spent his entire life overcoming physical limitations, doesn't just get a slightly different body. He becomes something completely alien. His identity as a man, as a husband, as a police officer, all of that gets stripped away when his physical form transforms into something unrecognizable. The mutation doesn't just change what he looks like, it erases who he is. And for a character whose entire arc on the show revolves around proving that his disability doesn't define him, being transformed into a creature that is defined entirely by its grotesque physical form is a particularly cruel fate. There's also the question of what the episode says about how we treat leadership in times of crisis. Peter doesn't become the leader of New Quahog because he's qualified. He becomes the leader because he found the food. That's it. He happened to stumble onto the one resource that everyone needed, and that accident of geography and luck gave him absolute power over a group of desperate, hungry people. Sound familiar? History is full of examples of leaders who rose to power not because of talent or wisdom, but because they controlled access to something everyone else needed: oil, water, land, food. The episode is, underneath all the cartoon violence and mutation gags, making a pretty sharp observation about how fragile democracy really is. Take away the grocery stores and the police departments and the courts, and whoever controls the next meal controls everything. And that person will almost certainly be someone like Peter Griffin. Not evil necessarily, just selfish, just short-sighted, just human enough to abuse power the second they get their hands on it. The fact that Family Guy was making these kinds of observations in its second season, buried inside an episode about Y2K and Twinkies, is part of what separated it from every other animated comedy on television. This wasn't just a show that told jokes. This was a show that told jokes while quietly saying something about who we are as people. And sometimes what it had to say was genuinely terrifying. Darboom destroyed the world and showed you what these characters would become without rules or structure to hold them together. But the next episode on our list doesn't need an apocalypse to be horrifying. It just needs a staircase, a baby, and a family so selfish that they'd rather let their infant son suffer a traumatic brain injury than take any responsibility for what happened to him. Brian Griffin's House of Pain from Season 8 is one of those episodes that sneaks up on you. The B-plot involves Brian trying to get a TV script produced, which is standard Family Guy fare. Mildly funny, nothing special, but the A-plot is something else entirely. Because the A-plot involves Stewie Griffin, a baby, getting knocked down a flight of stairs by his own siblings and suffering a massive head wound that the entire family then spends the rest of the episode trying to cover up instead of treating. Here's how it starts. Chris is running through the house because Meg is chasing him. Standard Griffin household chaos, But Stewie is at the top of the stairs, just sitting there being a baby, and Chris plows right into him. Stewie goes tumbling down the entire staircase and lands at the bottom with a sickening impact. And when the camera shows you what happened to him, your stomach drops. Because the animators did not hold back. Stewie has a massive gaping wound on his head. We're talking exposed flesh, visible damage, the kind of injury that in the real world would have you calling 911 before the kid even stopped falling. But Chris and Meg don't call 911. They don't call anyone. They look at each other. Look at Stewie lying there with a cracked open skull, and their first thought, their very first instinct, is to figure out how to avoid getting in trouble. Not how to help their baby brother, how to avoid consequences for themselves. Think about how twisted that is. A baby is lying at the bottom of a staircase with a head wound that you can literally see through the skin, and the two people who caused it are standing over him, trying to calculate who's going to get blamed. Chris and Meg don't take Stewie to a doctor. They don't tell their parents. They prop him up and try to pretend everything's normal, walking him around the house like a puppet while he's essentially in a coma, hoping nobody notices that their infant brother has a wound on his head the size of a baseball. And it works, at least for a while. Because Peter and Lois are so checked out as parents that they don't immediately realise something is wrong with their baby. That detail alone is horrifying. In a normal family, a parent would take one look at their child and know instantly that something terrible had happened. But the Griffins aren't a normal family. They're so wrapped up in their own nonsense that Stewie could walk in missing an arm and they might not notice until dinner. When the injury finally does come to light, things get even worse. Because instead of rushing Stewie to the hospital, instead of doing what any sane human being would do when they discover their baby has a traumatic head wound, the adults in the room start playing the same game the kids were playing. They start passing blame. Peter tries to make it look like Lois caused the injury. The kids try to redirect suspicion. At one point, Peter's scheming leads to Lois unknowingly running over Stewie with her car. Running over her own baby with her car because her husband manipulated the situation to make her the fall guy for an injury that happened because their other children are reckless and their household is a danger zone. The camera keeps showing you the wound. That's the part that really gets people. The animators didn't design one shot of the injury and then cut away. They show it again and again, from different angles, in close-up, lingering on it just long enough to make you genuinely nauseous. The gash gets worse over the course of the episode as it goes untreated. You can see it rotting, festering, getting more infected with every scene. And through all of it, Stewie is either unconscious or barely conscious, a baby suffering silently, while the people who are supposed to love him the most treat him like a broken vase they need to hide before company comes over. Screen Rant and Watch Mojo both rank this among the most disturbing episodes the show has ever produced, and it's easy to see why. Yes, Stewie is a cartoon character. Yes, he's also an evil genius who's built time machines and tried to take over the world. But visually, he's still a baby. He looks like a baby. He's drawn like a baby. And watching a baby with a gaping, infected head wound get passed around like a hot potato by a family that cares more about avoiding blame than saving his life triggers something deep and uncomfortable in most viewers. What makes the episode genuinely scary, not just gross but actually scary, is how realistic the family dynamics are underneath the cartoon surface. Strip away the animation and you've got a story about child neglect. About parents so disconnected from their children that a serious injury goes unnoticed. About siblings whose first instinct is self-preservation, not compassion. About a household where everyone is so focused on themselves that a baby can suffer for hours without anyone stopping to help. Family Guy plays it for laughs. Of course it does. That's what Family Guy does. But the laughs sit on top of something genuinely dark here. Something that makes you wonder, even after the credits roll and the next episode starts with Peter doing something goofy at the clam, whether the Griffin household is actually a safe place for anyone to live. The answer based on this episode, is a pretty clear no. There's another layer to this episode that doesn't get discussed enough. The B-plot with Brian trying to get his TV script produced actually mirrors the A-plot in a way that makes the whole thing even darker. Brian writes what he thinks is a sophisticated, meaningful, dramatic script. He takes it to a network, and the network systematically strips away everything that made it worthwhile, turning it into generic, disposable entertainment. Brian's art gets commodified, his vision gets destroyed. His passion gets reduced to something that exists purely for corporate profit. Now look at the A-plot. Stewie, a human being with thoughts and feelings and pain, gets treated the same way. He's commodified. His suffering is something to be managed, not addressed. His well-being is less important than the convenience of the people around him. Brian's script is a thing to be used and discarded. Stewie is a person being used and discarded. The parallel isn't subtle, but it's effective. Both plots are about the same fundamental horror. The horror of being treated as an object by the people and institutions that are supposed to value you. Peter and Lois don't see Stewie as a child who needs care. They see him as a situation that needs handling. Chris and Meg don't see their brother as a person in pain. They see him as evidence that needs to be hidden. Even the family dog, Brian, is too wrapped up in his own creative ambitions to notice that a baby in the house has a visible head injury. Every single person in Stewie's life fails him in this episode. Every single one. And the episode makes no effort to suggest that anyone learns anything from the experience, or that things will be different going forward. That's what separates this episode from a standard gross-out cartoon. It's not just showing you something disgusting, it's showing you something true, that some families are so broken, so fundamentally self-absorbed, that a child can be suffering right in front of them and nobody will notice, not because they can't see it, because they choose not to look. Brian Griffin's House of Pain shows the Griffins at their absolute worst, treating their own baby like a problem to manage instead of a child to protect. But the next episodes on our list take the horror in a completely different direction. Because in these two episodes, it's not about neglect or selfishness. It's about intent. Cold, calculated, murderous intent. From a baby who finally stops talking about killing his mother and actually does it. Stewie Griffin has been threatening to kill Lois since the very first episode of Family Guy. It's one of the show's oldest running jokes. The baby sits in his high chair, plots world domination, builds weapons of mass destruction in his bedroom, and constantly announces his plans to murder his mother. And every single time, nothing happens. He gets distracted, he fails, he moves on to something else. After a while, the audience stops taking it seriously. It becomes background noise. Just Stewie being Stewie. Nobody actually thinks he's going to do it. And then he does it. Stewie kills Lois and Lois kills Stewie is a two-part episode from season 6 that completely changed how audiences saw both of these characters. For the first time in the show's history, the writers let Stewie follow through. Not as a cutaway gag, not as a dream sequence you find out about 30 seconds later, as a full, committed narrative where a baby boards a cruise ship with a machine gun and opens fire on his own mother. The setup is almost mundane by Family Guy standards. It's Lois's birthday. The family gives her mediocre gifts, except Brian, who gives her cruise tickets. Lois and Peter take the cruise together, leaving Stewie behind. And Stewie, furious about being excluded, decides this is the moment. No more empty threats, no more failed schemes. He's actually going to kill her. He chases the ship down in a speedboat, climbs aboard, and finds Lois alone on the deck at night. She's been fighting with Peter, who embarrassed her at dinner by telling a story about how they almost aborted Meg. She's standing there in the dark, frustrated and vulnerable, when her infant son appears out of nowhere, holding a weapon. And before she can even process what's happening, Stewie opens fire. The scene is legitimately graphic for network television. Lois's chest is riddled with bullets. The show doesn't cut away. It doesn't soften the impact with a joke or a reaction shot. You watch Lois Griffin get shot multiple times at close range by her own baby, and then you watch her body fall backward over the railing and plummet into the ocean, sinking into the darkness below. The scene holds on that image, Lois disappearing into the black water, and then Stewie stands there on the deck, alone, absolutely thrilled with himself. 6 days pass, Lois is declared missing, the search is called off, and here's where the episode gets truly unsettling, because life just continues. Peter starts dating other people, Chris is told his mother is at a health spa, and Meg, according to Stewie, has actually started to flourish now that Lois is gone. A year goes by, an entire year where the family moves on from the death of their wife and mother with surprisingly little difficulty. The show is making a quiet, dark observation here about how replaceable people can be in the lives of the people who are supposed to love them most. Brian is the only one who pieces it together. He confronts Stewie, who doesn't even try to deny it. He's proud. He practically brags about it, and Brian, horrified, vows to bring him to justice. But in one of the darkest ironic twists the show has ever pulled, the evidence ends up pointing at Peter instead. Peter mentioned taking out a life insurance policy on Lois. He publicly wished she was dead after their fight. All the circumstantial evidence lines up perfectly against the wrong person, and Peter gets convicted of murder in the first degree. Just before the sentencing, Lois walks into the courtroom, alive. The relief you feel in that moment is real and immediate, but the show isn't done with you yet, because part 2 picks up right where part 1 left off, and it goes even darker. Lois explains that she survived the shooting, was rescued by a merman, wandered the country with amnesia, ended up at a fat camp in North Carolina, dated a white supremacist, got hit in the head with a bottle at a rally, and that impact restored her memory. It's absurd. It's ridiculous. It's classic Family Guy. But the second she points at Stewie and says he tried to kill her, the tone shifts completely. Stewie doesn't run. He doesn't deny it. He escapes, comes back to the house, and finds the family waiting for him. And then, in one of the most shocking single moments in the show's history, Cleveland walks through the front door, and Stewie shoots him dead. Right there, in front of the entire terrified family. Cleveland Brown, one of Peter's closest friends, a character who'd been on the show since the beginning, shot and killed in the Griffin living room by a baby with a gun. Stewie ties up the family, forces Brian to drive him to CIA headquarters, hacks into their supercomputer, takes control of the entire planet's power grid, and declares himself president of the world. He broadcasts his new laws across the globe. He operates from the White House. He has nuclear weapons at his disposal. A baby, running the planet through fear and technology and the genuine willingness to kill anyone who gets in his way. Lois decides she has to stop him. She arms herself with weapons from Stewie's own arsenal and storms the White House. What follows is a violent, extended battle between mother and son that plays out like something from an action movie. They fight through multiple rooms, weapons are fired, walls are destroyed. It's brutal and loud and completely committed to its own premise. Lois eventually gets the upper hand. She has the shotgun pointed at Stewie's head. She could end it right there, but she hesitates, because despite everything, despite the murder attempt, the dictatorship, the shooting of Cleveland, Stewie is still her baby. She drops the gun. She can't do it. Stewie has no such hesitation. He immediately goes for his weapon. And just before he can pull the trigger, Peter walks into the room and shoots Stewie. In the chest first, then in the head, his own son. Peter and Lois stand over Stewie's body, holding each other. Devastated, the show lets the silence hang. Two parents looking down at the corpse of their child, a child they had to kill because he would have killed them first. Then the words, "simulation over," appear on screen. The camera pulls back. Stewie is sitting in a strange chair-like device in his room. Brian walks in with postcards from Peter and Lois, who are apparently having a great time on their cruise. The whole thing was a simulation. Stewie was running a hypothetical on his machine to see what would happen if he actually went through with it. And here's the thing that makes this two-parter so haunting, even after the reveal. The simulation showed Stewie exactly what would happen. He would succeed. He would kill his mother. He would take over the world. He would become the most dangerous person on the planet. And then his father would put a bullet in his brain. And Stewie watched all of that play out, every detail, and his reaction at the end isn't horror or regret. It's more like curiosity, like he's filing the information away for later. The two-parter also permanently changed how the show handled Stewie as a character going forward. Before these episodes, Stewie's world domination plots and matricidal fantasies were treated as endearing quirks. He was the evil baby. It was cute. Kids dressed up as him for Halloween. He had catchphrases. "Victory shall be mine" and "What the juice" were on t-shirts and coffee mugs. He was merchandised. He was a cartoon villain in the same way Wile E. Coyote was a cartoon villain. You never actually believed he'd succeed. After Stewie kills Lois, the audience had to recalibrate. The show had demonstrated in extensive and graphic detail exactly what would happen if Stewie got serious. And the answer was catastrophic. Mass murder, global dictatorship, the complete subjugation of the human race under the rule of a baby with a British accent and no empathy. The show proved that Stewie wasn't just a cute running gag. He was a genuine threat that the universe had simply been too lazy to take seriously. It's worth pointing out how this connects to the later episode, Send in Stewie, Please, which aired in season 16 as the show's 300th episode. In that episode, Stewie sits in a child psychologist's office and over the course of a single conversation, drops his British accent and admits it's a facade. He admits he's lonely. He admits the world domination persona is a defense mechanism. He admits he's just a scared kid trying to figure out who he is. And then, at the end of the episode, the psychologist has a heart attack and Stewie lets him die because the man saw through his mask. The doctor discovered the real Stewie, and the real Stewie killed him for it. That episode is the spiritual sequel to Stewie Kills Lois. Both episodes ask the same question: who is Stewie Griffin really? And both episodes arrive at the same answer. He's someone who will destroy anything that threatens his sense of control, whether it's his mother, the world, or a therapist who got too close to the truth. The simulation in Stewie Kills Lois didn't just show Stewie what would happen if he killed his mother. It showed the audience what's actually living inside that football-shaped head. And it's not cute. It's not a gag. It's something genuinely dangerous wearing the disguise of an infant. The simulation twist means none of it really happened, but the intent was real. The desire was real. The capability was real. Everything the simulation showed, Stewie is actually capable of doing. He just hasn't done it yet. The simulation proved that Stewie has the intelligence, the resources, and the emotional detachment to carry out a global coup from his nursery. He's not a baby playing pretend. He's a weapon system in a onesie, and the only thing between him and world domination is a cost-benefit analysis that might swing the other way if the variables change. There's also the question of what the simulation reveals about Peter. In the final moments of the two-parter, it's Peter who kills Stewie, not Lois, who had the gun pointed at her son's head and couldn't pull the trigger. Peter, the bumbling, incompetent, emotionally stunted father who can barely remember his daughter's name. When the moment comes, when there is no other option, Peter is the one who does what has to be done. It's an act of horrifying parental violence that is simultaneously an act of love, because Peter killed Stewie to save Lois. He chose his wife over his son, and the simulation tells us that when pushed to the absolute limit, Peter Griffin is capable of that choice. That's not the Peter the audience thinks they know. That's someone else entirely, someone the comedy has been hiding. And that might be the scariest takeaway of all. Not that Stewie killed Lois in a simulation, but that the only thing stopping him from doing it in real life is that he knows how it ends. Stewie Kills Lois showed a baby who's willing to murder his own mother and take over the world if given the right motivation. But the next episode strips away all of that bombast, all of that spectacle, and replaces it with something far more unsettling. 2 characters, 1 room, and a conversation about why one of them keeps a loaded gun in a safety deposit box as a way out. Brian and Stewie from Season 8 is unlike any other episode of Family Guy, and honestly, it's unlike almost any other episode of any animated comedy, period. There are no cutaway gags, there are no musical numbers, there are no other characters. The episode aired commercial-free. It's just Brian and Stewie locked in a bank vault over a weekend, forced to spend 48 hours together with nowhere to go and nothing to do except talk. The setup is straightforward. Brian takes Stewie to the bank so he can check on his safety deposit box. They get locked in the vault after hours. The doors are time-locked and won't open until Monday morning. There's no phone, no way to call for help, and nobody knows they're there. They're stuck. For the first act, the episode leans into uncomfortable, gross-out humour. There's an extended sequence involving Stewie's diaper that the show absolutely did not need to include, but committed to anyway. It's deliberately unpleasant, the kind of scene that makes you wonder if the writers were testing the audience's patience on purpose, seeing how much goodwill they could burn through before getting to the real point of the episode. And then they get to the real point. Stewie notices something in Brian's safety deposit box. A gun. A loaded gun. Stewie, confused, asks Brian why he has it. Brian is a vocal advocate for gun control. He's given speeches about it. He's argued with the NRA. The hypocrisy is obvious and Stewie calls it out immediately. Brian doesn't have a clever answer. He doesn't deflect with humour or change the subject. He gets quiet. And then he tells Stewie the truth. He keeps the gun because he's thought about using it on himself. Not as a joke, not as a hypothetical. Brian Griffin, the talking dog, the family pet, the character who drinks martinis and writes novels and argues about politics at dinner parties, has genuinely contemplated suicide. He tells Stewie that he's unhappy, that he finds comfort in knowing there's a way out if things get bad enough, that the gun represents a kind of emergency exit he's never been able to let go of. The scene is played completely straight. There's no laugh track. There's no cutaway to lighten the mood. There's no comedic deflection. It's just Brian, a character audiences have spent 8 seasons getting to know, admitting that he's been carrying around a death wish that nobody ever noticed. Not Peter, not Lois, not any of his friends. The dog that everyone sees every day has been suffering in silence, and the only reason anyone found out is because he got locked in a vault with the one person perceptive enough to ask the right question. Stewie's reaction is what makes the scene land. He doesn't make fun of Brian. He doesn't dismiss it. He listens, really listens. And then he tells Brian something he's never told anyone, that Brian is his best friend. That without Brian he'd have nobody. That the thought of Brian not being around is the scariest thing he can imagine. It's the most emotionally raw moment in the history of the show. 2 characters who spend most episodes bickering and going on adventures, sitting on a cold vault floor, talking about loneliness and purpose and whether life is worth living. And the silence in the room carries more weight than any explosion or car chase or musical number the show has ever produced. What makes this episode genuinely terrifying, not just sad, but actually terrifying, is how real it feels. Depression doesn't announce itself with dramatic music and obvious warning signs. It hides in plain sight. It lives in people who seem fine, people who go to work and crack jokes and function in society while quietly carrying around a weight that nobody else can see. Brian has been on this show for 8 seasons at this point. Audiences have watched hundreds of episodes with him. And nobody, not the characters in the show, and not the people watching at home, had any idea he was in that much pain. The episode forces you to reconsider every single Brian moment you've ever watched. Every time he seemed frustrated or aimless or depressed, was that a setup for a joke? Or was the show quietly telling you something about this character that you weren't paying attention to? Every time he drank alone at the bar, every time he failed at a relationship, every time he talked about his novel that nobody read, was that comedy? Or was that a slow-motion portrait of a character losing reasons to stay alive? Brian and Stewie aired in 2010, and critics called it one of the best episodes the show ever produced. Not because it was funny, because it mostly isn't, but because it proved that Family Guy was capable of genuine emotional storytelling when it wanted to be. It proved that these characters, underneath all the crude humour and the offensive jokes and the endless gags, are actually capable of real depth and real pain. The silence in that vault is scarier than any monster or villain the show has ever created, because the villain in this episode is something you can't fight, can't run from, and can't see coming. It's the quiet desperation of someone who smiles every day while keeping a loaded gun in a box, just in case. The episode also represents something rare in television, especially animated television, a show admitting that one of its main characters is in pain and has been in pain for a long time, and that the other characters, the ones who live with him every day, never noticed. Peter never noticed, Lois never noticed, Cleveland, Joe, Quagmire, none of them picked up on the fact that their friend was suffering. And that's not an accusation of those characters specifically. It's an observation about how relationships actually work. We spend so much time around the people we love that we stop really seeing them. We assume they're fine because they were fine yesterday, and the day before that, and the day before that. We mistake consistency for contentment. And we miss the signs because we're not looking for them. Brian and Stewie also did something that no other Family Guy episode had attempted before, or has really attempted since. It trusted the audience to sit still. There's no action in this episode. Nobody runs anywhere. Nobody fights anyone. Nothing explodes. Two characters sit on a floor and talk for 22 minutes, and the show bet that the audience would stay for the whole thing. In a media landscape that was already trending towards shorter attention spans and faster editing and more stimulation per second, Family Guy aired an episode that was basically a one-act play, and it worked. Because when the writing is good enough and the characters are real enough, you don't need explosions. You just need two people being honest with each other in a room where there's nowhere to hide. The episode's decision to air without commercials was also significant. Fox gave up millions of dollars in advertising revenue to let this episode breathe. That's how much faith they had in the material. And it was the right call because any commercial break would have shattered the spell. The episode works because it's uninterrupted, because the silence builds, because you can't look away or check your phone or get a snack without losing the thread. It holds you in that vault with Brian and Stewie, and it doesn't let you leave until they're done talking. Brian and Stewie stripped the show down to its most vulnerable and proved that sometimes the scariest thing on television isn't what's on screen. It's what's been there the whole time that you never noticed. But the next episode goes in the opposite direction entirely. Instead of two characters in one room, it fills the screen with the entire cast of Quahog, puts them in a mansion on a cliff, and starts killing them off, one by one. For real. And then there were fewer from season 9 as a turning point for Family Guy. Not just because it's the first episode filmed in high definition, or because it runs a full hour, or because Seth MacFarlane personally confirmed that everything that happens in it is permanent canon. It's a turning point because it's the first time Family Guy killed characters and meant it. No resurrection, no dream sequence, no time travel undo button. When people die in this episode, they stay dead, and that changes everything about how you watch it. The premise is pulled straight from Agatha Christie. Peter receives a mysterious invitation to a dinner party being held in his honour at a grand mansion on a remote island. When the Griffin family arrives, they discover that they aren't the only guests, Practically everyone in Quahog has received the same invitation. Quagmire is there with his girlfriend Stephanie. Joe and Bonnie are there. Tom Tucker, Morton Muriel Goldman, Gillian and her husband Derek, Dr. Hartman, Seamus, even Consuela is there, working as the mansion's maid. Characters who have never shared a scene together are suddenly in the same room, and the show takes full advantage of how strange and exciting that is. The guest list alone tells you something is off. These characters don't socialise together. They exist in separate orbits within the show's universe. Tom Tucker doesn't hang out with Quagmire. Mort Goldman doesn't spend time with Seamus. The fact that someone brought all of these people together in one location feels wrong from the start, like the show is assembling its characters specifically so it can take them apart, which of course is exactly what it's doing. The mansion itself is a character. The production team designed it to feel both inviting and menacing simultaneously. Grand staircases, ornate wallpaper, roaring fireplaces. It looks like the kind of place where rich people throw dinner parties. But the hallways are too long. The rooms are too dark. The windows show nothing but storm and ocean. Every element of the set design is working to create a feeling of claustrophobia and unease, even before the first person dies. You feel trapped before the characters realise they're trapped. The show is ahead of you, setting the mood with environmental storytelling that most animated comedies would never bother with. There's also a dinner scene early in the episode that does something incredibly clever with the audience's expectations. James Woods gives a speech about redemption and personal growth. The characters exchange looks. Some of them want to believe him, others are skeptical, and the audience is right there with them, trying to figure out if this is a genuine character development moment or a setup for something terrible. The show lets you sit with that ambiguity for just long enough that when the first gunshot rings out, the betrayal feels personal. You were starting to believe too. You were starting to think maybe Family Guy was going to do something nice. And then someone dies and you remember what show you're watching. The host reveals himself as James Woods, who announces that he's become a born-again Christian and has invited everyone to make amends for all the terrible things he's done to them over the years. His new girlfriend Priscilla is there. The mood is tense but cautiously optimistic. Maybe this is legitimate. Maybe James Woods has actually changed. Then Quagmire's girlfriend Stephanie gets shot. It happens suddenly and without warning. One moment she's sitting in a chair, the next moment she's dead. A bullet meant for James Woods hit her instead when she sat in his seat. The guests immediately turn on Woods, assuming he's trying to kill them all. But before they can confront him, they realise they're trapped. A fallen tree has destroyed the bridge connecting the island to the mainland. There's no cell phone reception. The landline has been cut. Nobody is getting off this island until morning. What follows is a genuine murder mystery played almost entirely straight. Family Guy, a show that typically can't go 15 seconds without a pop culture reference or a fart joke, commits to the genre completely. There are only 2 cutaway gags in the entire hour, and both of them are directly relevant to the plot. The humour exists, but it's nervous humour. The kind of jokes people make when they're scared and trying to cope. The atmosphere is dark, literally and figuratively. The mansion is shadowy and full of hidden passages. The storm rages outside, and people keep dying. James Woods gets stabbed. His body is discovered, but then it disappears. The guests find his secret diary, which reveals all the terrible things he's done to each of them, giving practically everyone in the room a motive for murder. Muriel Goldman disappears during a search and is found stabbed to death. Derek Wilcox, Gillian's husband, goes off alone to find a cell phone signal, and someone beats him with a Golden Globe award and throws him off a balcony. Priscilla is found dead in a ceiling vent. The body count climbs, the tension builds, and the thing that makes it so effective is that you genuinely don't know who's going to survive. This isn't a regular Family Guy episode where Peter gets hurt and bounces back in the next scene. Characters are dying permanently. Muriel Goldman, who had been on the show since the beginning as Mort's wife, is gone forever after this episode. Derek Wilcox, gone. And the killer hasn't been revealed yet. Evidence points to Tom Tucker, who gets arrested, but Lois isn't convinced. She pieces together the real story by noticing a detail nobody else caught. Diane Simmons, the news anchor, packed a fresh shirt prepared specifically for her first solo broadcast. She would only do that if she already knew Tom wouldn't be co-anchoring with her anymore. She would only know that if she was the one who planned to get rid of him. Lois confronts Diane, and Diane pulls a gun. The truth comes pouring out. Diane's life has been falling apart. She turned 40, and Tom replaced her with a younger co-anchor. She dated James Woods, but he dumped her too. She paid Priscilla to convince Woods to become a born-again Christian so she could get him to the mansion, kill him, and frame Tom for the murder. It was a plan to destroy both of the men who ruined her life. But the plan went wrong when Stephanie was shot by mistake, and Diane had to start killing witnesses to protect herself. Priscilla saw too much. Muriel walked in at the wrong moment. Derek figured it out. Diane drags Lois to the edge of the cliff, ready to shoot her and make it look like an accident. And then a bullet comes from nowhere and hits Diane in the back. She stumbles, loses her balance, and falls off the cliff to her death. The camera cuts to an upstairs window where Stewie is holding a sniper rifle, scope still pressed to his eye. He lowers the weapon and says calmly, "If anyone's going to take that bitch down, it's me." That line is funny. It's peak Stewie. But it's also the perfect punctuation to an episode that treated death with more respect than Family Guy had ever shown before. Seth MacFarlane confirmed publicly that Diane Simmons, Muriel Goldman, and Derek Wilcox were permanently dead. Their voice actors would not be returning. These characters, some of whom had been on the show for nearly a decade, were written out forever in a single hour of television. And then there were fewer earned an 8.7 on IMDb, making it one of the highest-rated episodes in the show's entire run. Critics praised the animation, which was legitimately cinematic in a way the show had never attempted before. They praised the writing, which balanced humour and tension with surprising skill. And they praised the commitment. Family Guy didn't hedge its bets. It didn't bring anyone back at the end with a wink and a nudge. It killed people and moved on, and the show was permanently different because of it. What makes this episode genuinely scary isn't any single death. It's the realization that the rules have changed. In a show where characters routinely survive explosions, car crashes, and physical violence that would kill a real person 100 times over. This episode said, actually, sometimes people don't survive. Sometimes the joke stops and someone is just gone. And once that door opens, once you know that Family Guy is willing to permanently remove characters from the show, every future episode carries just a little more weight, a little more tension, a little more awareness that, in this world, consequences are real and death is final. There's also the way the episode handles Diane Simmons as a villain that deserves more attention. Diane isn't evil in the traditional cartoon sense. She's not trying to take over the world, or destroy Quahog, or prove some grand philosophical point. She's a woman whose life fell apart because of factors that were largely outside her control, and she channeled her rage and grief into a plan that was as meticulous as it was doomed. She turned 40. Her co-anchor replaced her. The man she loved left her. In a different show, Diane's story would be a sympathetic one. A woman facing ageism and rejection in an industry that discards women the moment they stop being young. But instead of processing that pain in a healthy way, Diane weaponized it. She became the very thing she was angry about, someone who destroys others to serve their own needs. And the tragedy is that by the time Lois figures out what's happening, Diane has already crossed too many lines to come back. She killed innocent people. Muriel Goldman never did anything to Diane. Derek Wilcox was just in the wrong place at the wrong time. They died because Diane's plan went sideways, and she decided that covering her tracks was worth more than their lives. The episode is also notable for being the first in Family Guy history to be filmed in high definition, widescreen format. The visual upgrade wasn't just a technical improvement, it changed the entire feel of the show. The mansion looks cinematic, the shadows look deeper, the storm outside feels more intense, the murders feel more graphic. Going from the show's traditional flat, bright animation style to this darker, more detailed look was like the difference between watching a sitcom and watching a thriller. The HD upgrade made the horror feel more real, more immersive, and more disturbing than it would have been in the show's old visual style. And then there's Stewie's sniper shot at the end. It's a moment that works on 3 different levels simultaneously. On the comedy level, it's hilarious. Classic Stewie, swooping in with military precision to protect his claim on killing Lois. On the plot level, it's the perfect resolution. The killer is stopped, Lois is saved, and the mystery is solved. But on the character level, it's deeply unsettling. Stewie didn't save Lois because he loves her. He saved her because he considers killing Lois his exclusive right. He's essentially defending his future murder victim from a competitor. If anyone's going to take that bitch down, it's me isn't a statement of affection. It's a statement of ownership. And it connects directly back to Stewie Kills Lois, reminding the audience that Stewie's desire to murder his mother isn't a joke. It's an ongoing project that he'll defend with lethal force. And then there were fewer proved that when Family Guy wants to, it can make death matter. It can make you feel the weight of losing characters you've known for years. But the show wasn't done testing that boundary, because a few seasons later, it would take the one character audiences loved the most, the one character who felt truly irreplaceable, and kill him in the most sudden, senseless way imaginable. Everyone who watched Family Guy in 2013 remembers exactly where they were when Brian died. That's not an exaggeration. Life of Brian from season 12 was one of those television events that crossed over from entertainment into genuine cultural moment. People who hadn't watched the show in years suddenly cared. Social media exploded. Petitions were started. The hashtag was trending worldwide. And it all happened because the writers decided to run over a dog with a car. Life of Brian doesn't build to the death. That's the whole point. There's no villain orchestrating things. There's no grand scheme. There's no dramatic irony where the audience knows something terrible is coming and has to watch helplessly. Brian is playing street hockey with Stewie one moment, and the next moment, a car comes out of nowhere and hits him. That's it. That's how fast it happens. The family rushes Brian to the veterinarian. He's lying on the table, clearly dying, and the scene plays out with an emotional sincerity that Family Guy almost never attempts. Brian looks at each family member. He says goodbye. He tells them he loves them. The family's crying. The audience is crying. And then Brian Griffin, who has been on the show since the very first episode, since before the cancellation and the revival and the merchandise and the spin-offs, is dead. What makes the scene so devastating is how ordinary it is. Brian didn't die saving the world. He didn't die in a blaze of glory. He died because a drunk driver was going too fast on a residential street. It's the kind of death that happens to real pets and real people every single day. And the show doesn't try to make it mean anything bigger than what it is. A life cut short for no reason at all. The veterinarian scene is where the show does something technically brilliant. Instead of playing Brian's death with dramatic music and cinematic camera work, the way it handled the murders in And Then There Were Fewer, it plays the scene almost like a home video. The lighting is flat, the angles are simple, there's no slow motion. Brian just lies there on the table, looking smaller and more fragile than he's ever looked. And the family gathers around him, like any family gathers around a dying pet. Peter doesn't make a joke. Lois doesn't have a breakdown. They just stand there and watch someone they love die, and they do it quietly, the way real people do in real hospitals and real veterinary offices every single day. The show understood that the most devastating way to depict Brian's death wasn't to make it cinematic. It was to make it mundane, to strip away every piece of dramatic artifice and just let the moment exist as what it is. A family losing someone, a room getting quieter, a space that was full becoming empty. The decision to play it small instead of big is what makes the scene so crushingly effective, because it mirrors the experience of real loss. When someone you love dies, it doesn't feel like a movie. It feels like the most ordinary, most terrible thing in the world. Family Guy captured that feeling with surgical precision, and it broke people. The aftermath is almost harder to watch than the death itself. Stewie, who has a time machine and has used it repeatedly throughout the series to fix problems exactly like this one, destroys it. He smashes the device that could bring Brian back and says he's done with time travel. The message is clear and brutal. This is permanent. There is no undo button. Brian is gone and he's not coming back. The family gets a new dog. His name is Vinny. He's voiced by a completely different actor. He moves into the house, sleeps in Brian's spot, interacts with the family like he belongs there. And the audience absolutely hated it. Not because Vinny was a bad character, but because he represented the replacement of someone irreplaceable. The show was asking viewers to accept that Brian Griffin, a character they had spent 12 seasons with, was simply gone, and that life would continue without him. The backlash was unlike anything the show had ever experienced. Online petitions gathered hundreds of thousands of signatures demanding Brian's return. Entertainment news outlets ran stories about the death. Social media was flooded with outrage. Fans who had stuck with the show through every controversy, every offensive joke, every line-crossing moment, drew the line at killing Brian. 2 episodes later, in the Christmas episode, Stewie finds a way to travel back in time and save Brian's life. The death is reversed. Brian comes home, everything goes back to normal, and the audience collectively exhaled. But here's the thing that makes Life of Brian genuinely terrifying, even in retrospect, even knowing that Brian comes back. For those 2 weeks between episodes, it was real. The audience didn't know Brian would be saved. They sat with the grief. They processed the loss. They watched a family try to move on from the death of someone they loved, and they felt that pain as if it were their own. The show proved that it could reach through the screen and make people feel genuine grief for a cartoon dog, and it did it by doing the cruelest possible thing. Not killing Brian dramatically, but killing him randomly, meaninglessly, in a way that made the audience realise that sometimes the worst things that happen in life don't have a reason behind them. Life of Brian is also one of the lowest rated episodes on IMDb, not because it was poorly made, but because the audience scored it based on how it made them feel. And how it made them feel was devastated. That kind of emotional response to an animated comedy isn't normal. It's the sign of a show that, for all its crude jokes and offensive humour, has somehow made people care about these characters deeply enough that losing one of them feels like losing a friend. The cultural response to Brian's death revealed something fascinating about the relationship between audiences and fictional characters. Fans didn't just say they were sad, they said they felt betrayed. They took Brian's death personally, as if the writers had done something to them, not just to a character on a show. The petitions weren't asking the show to reconsider a creative decision. They were demanding the return of someone they cared about. The language people used on social media wasn't the language of entertainment criticism. It was the language of grief, of loss, of anger at the unfairness of it all. And the show leaned into that discomfort during the 2 episodes where Brian was gone. They didn't let the audience off the hook. Vinny, the replacement dog, voiced by Tony Sirico, was designed to be likeable. He was warm, he was funny, he had good chemistry with Stewie, And that was the cruelest part. Because the show was essentially saying, yes, Brian is gone, but look, here's someone new, move on. The same message the show was delivering to the Griffin family was being delivered to the audience. And the audience responded exactly the way you'd expect grieving people to respond when someone suggests they move on too quickly, with fury. The 2-episode gap between Brian's death and his resurrection also created a strange social experiment. For 2 weeks, millions of viewers had to live with the knowledge that a character they loved was dead. They couldn't fast forward to the resolution. They couldn't binge the next episode to get the answer. They had to sit with it. They had to go to work the next day knowing that Brian Griffin was dead and not knowing if he was coming back. Some fans stopped watching. Some fans rewatched old episodes specifically to spend time with Brian before he died. Some fans wrote essays and think pieces about what the character meant to them. The show had accidentally created a shared mourning experience for millions of people, all centered around a cartoon dog. When Brian came back in the Christmas episode, the relief was palpable, but the experience left a mark. Fans who had been casual viewers became more emotionally invested because they'd been through something together, and fans who were deeply invested became wary. Because the show had proven it was willing to take Brian away. It did it once, it could do it again, and next time, there might not be a time machine to fix things. Life of Brian showed that Family Guy could make you grieve for a cartoon. It could take away someone you loved and make you feel the hole they left behind. But the next episode on our list doesn't play with death or grief. It plays with something far more uncomfortable, something the show had joked about for years without ever truly confronting. Domestic abuse. And unlike almost every other Family Guy episode, this one doesn't blink. Screams of Silence, the story of Brenda Q from season 10, is, depending on who you ask, either the bravest or the most irresponsible episode Family Guy ever made. Collider ranked it the #1 darkest episode in the entire series. Watch Mojo calls it the most infamous. Critics are split straight down the middle, and honestly, watching it, you can understand why both sides feel so strongly. Because this is the episode where Family Guy tried to tackle domestic violence seriously, and the result is something that still makes people uncomfortable more than a decade after it aired. The episode focuses on Quagmire's sister, Brenda. She arrives in Quahog with her boyfriend Jeff, and from the moment they walk through the door, something is wrong. Brenda has bruises. She makes excuses for them. Jeff is controlling, aggressive, and openly hostile in a way that makes everyone in the room tense. He talks down to Brenda in front of everyone. He grabs her arm too hard. He gets angry over nothing and takes it out on her with words first, then with his hands. Quagmire sees all of this and is desperate to help his sister. But Brenda won't leave. She loves Jeff. She believes he'll change. She makes excuses for his behaviour and gets angry at anyone who tries to intervene. If you've ever known someone in an abusive relationship, you know this pattern. The denial, the justification, the anger directed at the people trying to help instead of at the person causing the pain. The show captures it with uncomfortable accuracy. What makes the episode so disturbing is the tone. Family Guy is a comedy. Every episode has jokes. Every scene has gags and cutaways and moments designed to make you laugh. But Screams of Silence barely has any of that. The domestic violence is played almost entirely straight. When Jeff hits Brenda, you're not supposed to laugh. When she flinches at sudden movements, you're not supposed to find it funny. The show removes its safety net and forces you to sit with the reality of what's happening on screen. Peter, Joe, and Quagmire spend the episode trying to figure out what to do. They talk to Brenda. They confront Jeff. Nothing works. Jeff is smart enough to be charming when he needs to be, and violent when he thinks nobody's watching. He isolates Brenda from her support system. He makes her financially dependent on him. He breaks her down psychologically until she genuinely believes that his abuse is her fault, and that leaving would be worse than staying. The climax is where the episode crosses into territory that divided the audience completely. Peter, Joe, and Quagmire decide that the only way to save Brenda is to kill Jeff. They lure him into the woods and they murder him. Quagmire strangles his sister's abuser to death, while Peter and Joe hold him down. It's violent and extended, and the show does not cut away. Let that sit for a second. 3 main characters on a network comedy plan and execute a murder. Not an accidental death, not self-defense in the moment, a premeditated killing. They decided Jeff needed to die, they made a plan, and they carried it out. The show presents this as the right decision, the only decision, and it never really grapples with the moral complexity of what that means. Critics who praised the episode said it was the show's most mature and empathetic storytelling. Guest star Caitlin Olsen, who voiced Brenda, brought a genuine emotional depth to the character that elevated every scene she was in. There are moments in this episode where Brenda's pain is so real and so vivid that you forget you're watching a cartoon. Olsen's vocal performance carries a weight that most animated shows never come close to achieving. But critics who condemned the episode had valid points too. Family Guy has used abuse, both physical and emotional, as a joke for its entire run. Peter hits Meg. The family treats her like garbage. Characters are violent toward each other constantly, and it's always played for laughs. So when the show suddenly decides that domestic violence is serious and horrifying, it feels hypocritical. You can't spend 15 seasons using abuse as a punchline and then expect the audience to take your very special episode about abuse seriously without some pushback. There's also the Quagmire problem. Quagmire is the character who saves his sister in this episode. Quagmire is also one of the most sexually aggressive characters in television history. He's drugged women. He's taken advantage of unconscious people. He's been arrested multiple times for behaviour that, in the real world, would put him on a registry. The show is asking the audience to root for a character who has perpetrated the exact kind of harm he's trying to save his sister from, and it never acknowledges that contradiction. The episode ends with Brenda mourning Jeff. She doesn't know he was murdered. She thinks he abandoned her, and she's devastated by the loss of her abuser, which is psychologically accurate and absolutely heartbreaking. Abuse victims often grieve their abusers because the relationship, however toxic, was their entire world. Brenda lost the person she loved, even though that person was destroying her, and nobody can tell her the truth about what really happened. Screams of Silence is Family Guy at its most uncomfortably honest. It doesn't work perfectly. The tonal whiplash between the show's usual crude humour and this episode's deadly serious subject matter is jarring. The moral simplicity of just kill the abuser glosses over the incredibly complex reality of domestic violence intervention. And the hypocrisy of Quagmire as the hero is impossible to ignore. But it's also one of the only times the show has tried to say something real about something that matters. Domestic violence is an epidemic. Millions of people live in relationships exactly like Brenda and Jeff's. And while Family Guy may not have handled the topic perfectly, it put it in front of millions of viewers who might never have thought about it otherwise. Whether that makes it brave or reckless is a question the audience is still debating. What stays with you about Screams of Silence isn't the murder at the end. It's the small moments of abuse throughout the episode that feel so achingly specific that you wonder if someone on the writing staff had personal experience with what they were depicting. The way Jeff controls when Brenda eats, the way he monitors who she talks to, the way he alternates between violent outbursts and almost tender moments of affection, keeping Brenda locked in a cycle of fear and hope that she can never escape on her own. These aren't cartoon exaggerations. These are textbook abuser tactics, rendered with a specificity that suggests real research or, worse, real experience. There's a moment early in the episode where Jeff smiles at Quagmire and shakes his hand while simultaneously squeezing Brenda's wrist under the table. That single image captures the entire horror of domestic abuse in one frame. The public face, the private violence, the victim silenced by pain, while the abuser performs normalcy for an audience. It's such a precise, deliberate visual choice that you can tell the animators understood exactly what they were drawing and why it mattered. The aftermath of the episode is also worth considering. Brenda appeared in later episodes of Family Guy, but the show never really followed up on her story in a meaningful way. She doesn't get therapy, she doesn't process her trauma, she just exists in the background of Quagmire's life, a reminder of something terrible that happened and was resolved through violence rather than through any kind of systemic change or personal healing. The show killed Jeff, but it didn't fix Brenda, and that's either a realistic depiction of how abuse survivors often get forgotten by the systems that claim to help them, or it's the show losing interest in a character once the dramatic potential of her suffering was exhausted. Depending on your level of generosity toward the writers, it could be either one. Screams of Silence showed Family Guy at its most brutally serious, tackling real-world horror without its usual comedy safety net. But the next episode takes horror in a completely different direction. Away from reality, away from Quahog, and into a place that should be magical and wonderful, but turns out to be one of the most nightmarish locations the show has ever imagined. The North Pole. Road to the North Pole from Season 9 is a Christmas episode. Let that sink in for a moment. This is the show's holiday special, the episode that aired during the season, when families are gathered around the television watching festive programming together. And what Family Guy delivered was a horror movie set at Santa's workshop that genuinely traumatized viewers who were expecting sleigh bells and presents. The setup is vintage Brian and Stewie road to episode. Stewie goes to the mall, meets a rude Santa, and decides he wants to go to the real North Pole to give Santa Claus a piece of his mind. Brian reluctantly agrees to come along, because he always reluctantly agrees. They hit the road, and the first half of the episode plays like a classic adventure. The two of them travelling through snow and ice, bickering, bonding, getting into ridiculous situations. Standard stuff if you've seen any of the Road to episodes before. And then they arrive at the North Pole. And everything changes. Santa's workshop is not what anyone expected. It's not a cozy cabin filled with happy elves making toys. It's an industrial nightmare. Think factories from the worst parts of the Industrial Revolution, combined with a Soviet labor camp. The building is falling apart. The equipment is ancient and dangerous. Everything is covered in grime and ice, and the general sense that this place has been suffering for a very long time. The elves are horrifying, because the demand for toys has increased so dramatically over the decades. Santa has been forcing the elves to breed at an unsustainable rate. The result is generations of inbreeding that have produced mutated, deformed creatures that barely resemble the cheerful little helpers from Christmas stories. They're twisted, they're in pain, some of them can barely function. They shuffle around the factory floor with dead eyes, producing toys on an assembly line that looks more like a slaughterhouse than a workshop. And then there are the reindeer, Rudolph and Dasher and Prancer and all the rest of them. They're not the majestic flying animals from the songs. They've gone feral, completely wild and carnivorous. When Brian and Stewie encounter them, the reindeer attack with genuine animalistic violence, snarling and biting and trying to kill them. These are not pets, these are predators, and they've been eating whatever they can get their teeth into for God knows how long. Santa himself is the worst part. He's not jolly, he's not fat. He's a broken, emaciated, dying old man who has been crushed under the weight of an impossible job for centuries. The bags under his eyes are permanent. His body is failing. He's been working himself to death trying to keep up with the exponentially growing list of children who want presents, and it's destroyed him physically and mentally. The design of Santa in this episode deserves special recognition because it's the visual element that stays with people the longest. The animators didn't just make Santa look tired, they made him look like a hospice patient. His cheeks are sunken, his eyes are glassy and distant, his hands tremble. His red suit hangs off his frame like it was made for someone twice his size, which it probably was, back when he was the jolly figure everyone imagines. The transformation from the Santa of mythology to the Santa of this episode is a visual metaphor for what happens to anyone who has worked beyond their limits for too long. The job didn't just age him, it consumed him. He's being eaten alive by the demands of an ungrateful world, and the show renders that consumption with graphic, unflinching clarity. When Santa speaks, his voice cracks. He doesn't talk like a powerful, immortal being. He talks like a man who gave up hoping for rescue a long time ago and is now just waiting for the end. He's apologetic about the state of the workshop, which is heartbreaking. He's embarrassed by the condition of the elves, which is worse. He knows the system is broken. He knows the creatures under his care are suffering, but he can't stop. He can't fix it. He's one person trying to serve billions, and the math has been impossible for centuries. Nobody helped him. Nobody offered an alternative. Nobody even acknowledged that what the world asks of Santa is a grotesque impossibility. They just kept adding children to the list and expecting the presents to appear on time, and he asks Stewie to kill him. Santa Claus, the most beloved figure in Western childhood mythology, looks a baby in the eyes and begs to be put out of his misery. He wants to die. He's been wanting to die for years. But nobody comes to the North Pole. Nobody checks on Santa. Nobody cares about the infrastructure that makes Christmas happen. Everyone just takes and takes and takes, and the system that supports their holiday has collapsed into a hell of suffering and exploitation while they hang stockings and sing carols. Brian and Stewie, moved by what they've seen, decide to give Santa a break and deliver the presents themselves for one night. This is where the episode delivers its second punch because the home delivery goes horribly wrong. They break into a family's house to leave presents, and it turns into a home invasion. They crash through walls, they destroy property, they terrify the family inside. The father grabs a weapon. Brian and Stewie barely escape. The scene is shot and paced like a horror movie, with darkness and silence, and sudden bursts of violence. It's supposed to be two cartoon characters delivering Christmas gifts, and instead it looks like the opening scene of a true crime documentary. The episode eventually pivots to a resolution where the characters convince the world to scale back Christmas expectations. But by that point, the damage is done. The images are burned in. The mutant elves dragging themselves across the factory floor, the feral reindeer tearing at flesh, Santa's hollow, desperate eyes as he begs a child to end his life. The screaming family huddle together while two intruders destroy their home. Road to the North Pole works because it takes something universally beloved, something innocent and hopeful, and shows you what it would actually look like if it were real. The logistics of one man delivering billions of presents in a single night are impossible, and the show asks what the cost would be on the people or creatures forced to make it work. The answer is a labour camp staffed by genetic mistakes, guarded by man-eating animals, and run by a man who'd rather be dead than deliver one more toy. It's a Christmas special that genuinely haunted people. Parents who watched it with their kids had to explain why Santa was sick and the elves were scary. Adults who watched it alone sat in the dark afterward, trying to reconcile what they'd just seen with the jolly mythology they'd grown up with. And the show, true to form, didn't apologise for any of it. What's particularly clever about Road to the North Pole is how it uses the structure of the Road to episodes to lull you into a false sense of security. Brian and Stewie's Road to episodes have a formula. They start with a reason to travel somewhere. They encounter obstacles along the way. They bicker, they bond, they have musical numbers, and they arrive at their destination for a climactic sequence that's usually exciting or funny or both. The audience knows this formula. The audience, they've seen it play out across multiple episodes. and Road to the North Pole follows the formula perfectly, right up until the moment they reach the North Pole. Then the formula breaks, because every other road to destination has been exactly what you'd expect. The multiverse was full of parallel dimensions. Europe had European things. The road trips deliver on the premise. But the North Pole doesn't deliver on its premise. It subverts it. You expect warmth and wonder, and you get suffering and decay. You expect elves making toys with hammers, and you get mutants dragging themselves across a factory floor. You expect Santa laughing with a belly full of cookies, and you get a dying man begging for the release of death. The subversion is what makes it land so hard. If this were a standalone episode about a dark version of Christmas, it would be effective, but not shocking. But because it comes wrapped in the familiar Road to format, because the first half lulls you into expecting something fun and exciting, the reveal of the North Pole hits like a punch to the gut. You were expecting Road to the North Pole to be a Christmas adventure. Instead, it's a Christmas horror movie. And by the time you realise what's happening, you're already too deep into the nightmare to look away. The home invasion sequence deserves special attention too, because it's the moment where the show's usual cartoon logic completely collapses. In any other episode, Brian and Stewie would break into a house, and it would be played as a wacky heist sequence. Here, the family inside reacts the way a real family would react to intruders in their home at 3 a.m. They scream, they grab weapons, the father is ready to kill to protect his children. And Brian and Stewie, who are supposed to be the heroes of this story, are the source of genuine terror for innocent people. The show forces you to see its protagonists through the eyes of their victims, and what you see is two monsters breaking into your house on Christmas Eve. Road to the North Pole turned Christmas into a nightmare, and Santa into a tragic, broken victim of a system that exploits him for the benefit of people who will never know or care about his suffering. But the next episode on our list doesn't need fantasy or mythology to be terrifying. It takes 4 guys, an abandoned building, and one terrible accident, and turns it into a psychological thriller about guilt, paranoia, and the terrifying realization that you've just killed an innocent man and there's nothing you can do to take it back. Peter Normal Activity from season 14 starts innocently enough. Peter, Cleveland, Joe, and Quagmire go to a horror movie together and come out the other side convinced they could write something better. Which, fair enough, is probably what 90% of the audience thinks after watching a bad, scary movie. The 4 of them sit around bouncing ideas off each other, but nothing sticks. Peter pitches a movie about a monster cat. Cleveland suggests a zombie film set in an abandoned hospital. Someone throws out the idea of an evil bar of soap. These are terrible ideas, and the show knows it. The whole sequence is played for comedy. 4 middle-aged guys who have no business writing anything trying to force creativity. Then someone suggests they visit an actual abandoned asylum for inspiration. Get into the atmosphere, feel the vibe, let the setting do the creative work for them. And this is where the episode shifts from a comedy about 4 guys failing at screenwriting into something much darker. The asylum is exactly what you'd expect from a horror movie set. Dark hallways, broken windows, the kind of place where every creak and groan makes your brain scream that something is wrong, and you should leave immediately. The guys wander through the building, still joking, still pitching ideas, still acting like this is a fun field trip. But the building has other plans. They hear a noise, something moves in the darkness. Panic sets in fast, and suddenly these 4 grown men, who were cracking jokes 5 minutes ago, are scrambling for the exit. But the door is locked. They're trapped inside an abandoned asylum in the dark, with something making noises in the halls. They decide to crawl through a ventilation shaft to escape, which leads them into the basement. Near another exit, they encounter a man. He's shadowy. He has a hook. Every horror movie instinct fires at once. The guys make a split-second decision. They outnumber him. They rush him. They tackle him to the ground. And they beat him. And they beat him to death. Not until he's unconscious, until he's dead. 4 men, fueled by fear and adrenaline, attack a stranger in the dark and don't stop until he's no longer moving. And then, in the silence that follows, they discover who he was. He wasn't a monster. He wasn't a killer. He was a decorated military veteran who was apparently trying to help them find a way out. They killed an innocent man, a hero. The horror of this realization hits different from every other scare in Family Guy. This isn't supernatural. This isn't a cartoon villain or an exaggerated scenario. This is something that could actually happen. Group of scared people in the dark, making a terrible decision based on fear, and living with the consequences of that decision for the rest of their lives. It feels real in a way that mutant elves and baby assassins don't. Quagmire immediately wants to turn themselves in. He's the one with the clearest moral compass in this moment, which is saying something given everything we know about Quagmire, but Joe shuts him down. Joe, the cop, the one person in the group who should absolutely know the right thing to do in this situation, decides that the right thing is to cover it up. They drag the body outside, they dig a hole, they bury the man, then they find his car, dig a second hole, and bury that too. The second half of the episode becomes a paranoia thriller. Peter goes home, and Lois starts talking to him. Normal conversation. How was your night? Did you have fun with the guys? And Peter, who now has the fresh memory of killing a man and burying the body, starts hearing accusations in everything she says. Every innocent comment sounds like she knows. Every question sounds like an interrogation. His mind is tearing itself apart trying to act normal while carrying a secret that's eating him alive. He contacts the other guys and discovers they're all falling apart in their own ways. The guilt is destroying them from the inside, but instead of bringing them closer together, it's driving them apart. Because scared, guilty people don't bond over their shared crime. They start looking for someone else to blame. Peter decides to frame Quagmire. He gathers Quagmire's belongings and plants them near the burial site, intending to point the police at him if anyone ever discovers the body. But when he arrives at the site, he finds Joe already there, planting Peter's stuff. And Quagmire is there too, planting Cleveland's things. All 4 of them had the exact same idea at the exact same time. Frame one of your best friends to save yourself. They face off with shovels. 4 men who have been friends for years, who drink together at the Drunken Clam every week, who have been through countless adventures together, standing in the dark beside a freshly dug grave, each one ready to betray the others, to avoid prison. The friendship that the entire show is built on, Peter and his 3 best friends at the bar, comes within inches of being destroyed forever by a single act of violence and the guilt that followed. The episode ends with a dark comedy beat. They pass a newspaper box and see a headline revealing that the veteran's military honours were faked. He was a fraud. Not actually a hero. Just a guy with a fake backstory and a hook. The guys instantly feel better about themselves and move on. But the very last shot of the episode is back at the asylum. A hand attached to a hook reaching up through the dirt of the grave. The man they buried might not be as dead as they thought. The crime they committed, the one they convinced themselves doesn't matter anymore, might still come back for them. Peter Normal activity is terrifying because it holds a mirror up to something deeply uncomfortable about human nature. When good people, or at least people who think of themselves as good, do something terrible, their first instinct isn't to confess, it's to cover it up, it's to protect themselves, it's to look at their closest friends and calculate whether throwing them under the bus is worth it. The episode takes the lovable idiots of Family Guy and shows you what they'd really do if pushed far enough. And the answer is, they'd kill a man, bury the evidence, and try to frame each other. That's not a cartoon villain, that's just people. The B-plot of the episode, which follows Brian's irritation at Stewie's pretentious new glasses, provides an unexpected counterpoint to the main story's themes. While Peter and the guys are committing murder and burying evidence, Brian and Stewie are engaged in a petty conflict about authenticity and ego. Stewie eventually destroys the glasses by hitting Brian with a baseball bat, which is violent but cartoonishly so. The contrast between the two plots is deliberate. In one story, violence has real permanent consequences. A man dies, friendships are destroyed, guilt eats people alive. In the other story, violence is the same throwaway slapstick it's always been. Nobody gets hurt, nothing matters. The bat to the face is funny. The beaten man in the basement is not. By running these two plots simultaneously, the episode is subtly commenting on the show's own relationship with violence. Family Guy has always been a show where violence is comedy. Peter gets hurt every episode and bounces back. Characters are maimed, crushed, shot and exploded, and it's always played for laughs. Peter Normal Activity asks what happens when you take that same violence and make it real. Same characters, same show, same animation style, but this time when someone gets hurt they don't bounce back. They die, and the characters who caused it don't shrug it off and move on to the next scene. They're destroyed by what they've done. The newspaper twist at the end is the most cynical beat in the whole episode. The guys discover that the man's military honours were faked, and immediately the guilt evaporates. They feel fine, they move on. The show is making a vicious observation about moral relativism. The man is just as dead whether he was a real veteran or a fake one. Their actions are just as violent. The crime is just as serious. But because the victim turned out to be imperfect, the perpetrators feel justified. It's a shortcut to absolution that real people use all the time. If I can find a flaw in the person I hurt, then I didn't really do anything wrong. The episode knows this is a lie. The hand reaching out of the grave in the final shot is the truth, pushing back against the convenient fiction the guys have constructed to protect themselves. Peter Normal Activity trapped the guys with the guilt of taking an innocent life and watching their friendships crack under the pressure. But the next episode traps a different character in a different kind of nightmare. One where the person who spent his entire life crossing every line finally has those lines crossed against him. Quagmire's Quagmire from season 12 is an episode that operates on a very specific kind of irony. Glenn Quagmire is Family Guy's resident sexual deviant. Since the very first season, his entire character has been built around being the guy who will pursue absolutely anyone, say yes to absolutely anything, and push the boundaries of consent and decency without a second thought. Giggity, giggity. That's his catchphrase, that's his whole identity. The guy who's always looking for the next thrill, the next conquest, the next boundary to cross. So what happens when Quagmire meets someone worse than him? The episode introduces Sonia, a woman who finds Quagmire's extensive pornography collection and thinks they're perfect for each other. On paper, she's his ideal partner. She's as sexually adventurous as he is. She's assertive. She's confident. Everything Quagmire has always said he wanted in a woman, Sonia delivers. But something goes wrong almost immediately. Because Sonia isn't just adventurous. She's aggressive. She's controlling. She's violent. And Quagmire, who has spent his entire adult life being the one in control of every sexual encounter, suddenly finds himself on the receiving end of someone who doesn't respect his boundaries, doesn't listen when he says no, and uses physical force to get what she wants. Quagmire shows up at the drunken clam with a black eye. That image, by itself, is one of the most disturbing things the show has ever put on screen. Not because of the makeup or the bruise, because of who it's on. This is Quagmire, the character who's been the aggressor in every relationship he's ever been in. The guy who has physically overpowered, manipulated, and violated people throughout the entire series without consequence. And now, he's the one with a bruise he can't explain, trying to make excuses for the person who gave it to him. He tells the guys it was an accident. He says he walked into a door, he minimizes it, He deflects. He does exactly what Brenda did in Screams of Silence, which aired just 2 seasons earlier. The parallel is deliberate and devastating. The show is holding up a mirror to its own audience and saying, "You laughed at this when he was doing it to other people. Are you laughing now?" Some viewers weren't. Some viewers were deeply uncomfortable watching Quagmire, a character they'd always seen as the fun party guy, become a victim of the exact kind of behaviour he's been perpetrating for years. The black eye isn't just a plot point, it's an indictment of Quagmire, of the audience, of the show itself. It's Family Guy looking at one of its most popular recurring bits and saying, "Actually, this is what it looks like from the other side, and it's not funny at all." Quagmire tries to leave Sonia. She won't let him. He tries to establish boundaries. She violates them. He admits to the guys that he prefers to be the one in control, which is simultaneously a confession about his relationship with Sonia and an inadvertent confession about every relationship he's ever been in. The line between victim and perpetrator blurs in a way that makes the audience genuinely uncomfortable, because you want to feel sorry for Quagmire, but you also know that he's done worse to other people. You want the situation resolved, but you're not sure he deserves a clean resolution. The guys eventually stage an intervention, because that's what friends do when they see someone being hurt. But the intervention is complicated by the fact that they all know who Quagmire really is. They know his history. They know what he's done. And while they want to help their friend escape an abusive relationship, there's an unspoken acknowledgement that Quagmire's suffering might be karma, that the universe is giving him a taste of what he's given others. The episode doesn't resolve this tension cleanly, and that's part of what makes it so effective. There's no neat lesson. There's no moment where Quagmire learns his behaviour was wrong and promises to change. He just gets out of the relationship and goes back to being Quagmire. But the audience has seen something they can't unsee. They've seen the most confident, aggressive character on the show reduced to a man with a black eye, making excuses for his abuser. And whether they feel sympathy or satisfaction, they can't feel nothing. Quagmire's Quagmire works because it weaponizes the audience's own history with the character against them. You've laughed at Quagmire for years. You've watched him do terrible things and called it comedy. And now the show's asking you to watch him suffer the same way and decide how you feel about it. There's no right answer. That's the point. The discomfort is the point. What the episode also does, quietly and without calling attention to it, is challenge the audience to think about every Quagmire joke they've ever laughed at. There's a moment in the episode where Quagmire is sitting in his house alone, flinching at a sound because he thinks Sonia might be coming. He's jumpy, he's paranoid, he's afraid in his own home. And if you've been watching Family Guy for any length of time, you've seen this exact scene before, except the person flinching was one of Quagmire's victims. Women he's stalked, women he's drugged, women who ended up in his house through deception and woke up not knowing where they were. The show has played those scenarios for laughs hundreds of times. And now it's showing you the exact same scenario with Quagmire on the receiving end, and suddenly it's not funny anymore. That tonal shift is the episode's real thesis. The exact same behaviour is horrifying when it happens to someone the audience is told to care about, and hilarious when it happens to someone the audience is told to dismiss. Quagmire's Quagmire doesn't change any of the facts about what Quagmire has done. It just changes the perspective. And in changing the perspective, it reveals that the audience's reaction to abuse has always been conditional. Abuse is funny when it happens to strangers and anonymous women. Abuse is serious when it happens to a character you know. That's an incredibly uncomfortable thing to discover about yourself, and the episode makes no effort to let you off the hook. The B-plot of the episode, which involves the Griffins preparing for Halloween, adds an additional layer of unease because it's so normal. While Quagmire is living through a nightmare, the rest of the cast is going about their ordinary lives. Nobody rushes to help him. Nobody sounds the alarm. His friends are carving pumpkins and picking out costumes while he's being beaten by someone he can't escape from. The mundanity of everyone else's lives makes Quagmire's suffering feel even more isolated, even more invisible, even more like the kind of thing that really happens to real people while the world around them continues without noticing. Quagmire's Quagmire turned the show's biggest predator into a victim and forced the audience to sit with the hypocrisy of their own reactions. But the next episode doesn't deal in moral complexity or philosophical questions. The next episode is about a baby contracting herpes from a dog, and it's one of the most visually revolting things the show has ever committed to screen. Herpy the Love Saw from Season 12 is one of those episodes where you can almost feel the animators daring each other to go further. Like someone in the writer's room said, how gross can we actually make this? And the answer was really, really gross. The episode starts with Brian and Stewie deciding to become blood brothers. It's a bonding ritual, a symbol of friendship. They each make a small cut and press their wounds together, mingling their blood. It's supposed to be sweet, in a weird Family Guy kind of way. Two characters who genuinely care about each other making a permanent commitment to their friendship. Then Stewie develops a sore on his face. Not a small sore, not a subtle blemish. A massive, angry, pus-filled lesion that takes up a significant portion of his face and gets worse with every scene. The animators designed this thing to be as nauseating as possible. It's red and swollen and wet. It oozes. It glistens under the light in a way that tells you the liquid is not staying contained for much longer. And the camera doesn't shy away from it. Every scene with Stewie features a close-up of the sore that lingers just long enough to make your stomach turn. Stewie has herpes, and he got it from Brian. The realization unfolds slowly. Stewie doesn't immediately understand what's happening to his face. He tries to cover it up. He tries to treat it, but the sore keeps growing, keeps getting more graphic, and eventually the truth becomes unavoidable. Brian, his best friend, the person he chose to bond with through a sacred ritual of shared blood, was carrying a sexually transmitted infection and didn't tell him. Brian knew. That's the part that transforms this from a gross-out comedy into something genuinely disturbing. Brian knew he had herpes. He knew there was a risk of transmission through blood contact, and he went through with the blood brother ritual anyway, either because he didn't care enough to stop it or because he was too embarrassed to admit the truth. Either way, the result is the same. A baby is now permanently infected with an STI because an adult chose not to disclose his health status, and the episode includes a sequence showing future Stewie, and if present-day Stewie's sore was bad, future Stewie's condition is a horror show. His entire body is covered in lesions. Puss is actively leaking from multiple sores. He looks like a medical textbook illustration of worst-case scenario transmission, and the show lingers on every detail with the kind of loving attention that normally gets reserved for food photography or nature documentaries. Watch Mojo described the episode as having a very unpleasant atmosphere, which is probably the most generous way to put it. There's gross-out humour, and then there's this. The show crossed into territory that made people physically uncomfortable, not because of the subject matter itself, but because of how lovingly and thoroughly it visualised the consequences. Every frame with the saw is designed to make you feel something in your stomach. The sound design makes it worse. You can practically hear the infection spreading, but underneath the body horror, there's a real betrayal happening. Brian and Stewie's relationship is the emotional core of the entire show. They're the characters who go on adventures together. They're the ones who have heart-to-heart conversations in bank vaults about loneliness and suicide. They're the partnership that makes the show work. And in this episode, Brian violated that trust in one of the most intimate ways possible. He exposed his best friend to a permanent health condition because he was too ashamed to be honest. The herpes will never go away. That's the thing about the ending that most people don't think about. The sore fades, the episode ends, and the next week everything seems fine. But Stewie has herpes for the rest of his life. It's incurable. Every time it flares up, every time a new sore appears, it's a reminder that Brian chose secrecy over Stewie's health. That's not a cartoon gag. That's a real violation of trust between two characters the audience genuinely cares about. Herpy the Love Sore is body horror, wrapped in betrayal, wrapped in the most disgusting visual presentation the show could possibly create. It's an episode that attacks you from two directions simultaneously, making you sick to your stomach and making you angry at the same time. The infection on Stewie's face is horrifying. The infection in the friendship might be worse. There's also a subplot in this episode that adds another dimension to the horror. Peter gets into a violent conflict with a group of guys at the Clam over a booth. It's typical Family Guy physical comedy on the surface, but the episode plays the escalation straight enough that the violence registers differently in the context of the A-plot. When Peter's conflict turns bloody, you're already primed by Stewie's infection to see physical damage as something real and consequential rather than something cartoonish and disposable. The episode uses its gross-out A-plot to recalibrate how you process violence in the B-plot, which is a surprisingly sophisticated storytelling technique for a show that's supposedly just about fart jokes and celebrity impressions. But the thing that haunts viewers most about Herpy the Love Sore is how it reframes every future Brian and Stewie interaction. After this episode, every time they go on a road to adventure, every time they sit together on the couch, every time Brian gives Stewie advice, or Stewie trusts Brian with a secret, there's an invisible asterisk. Brian knew he had herpes and he didn't tell Stewie. He chose his own comfort and his own shame over his best friend's health. That's not something you get past. In real relationships, a betrayal like that would end the friendship. In the Family Guy universe, the status quo resets and everyone moves on, but the audience remembers. And every time Brian acts like Stewie's protector or moral compass, somewhere in the back of your mind, you're thinking about the sore on a baby's face and the friend who put it there. The future Stewie sequence is also worth examining as horror in its own right. Seeing an older version of a character you know covered in open, weeping sores isn't just gross. It's a glimpse of inevitable suffering. It's the show saying, this is what's coming for him. Not might come, will come, the herpes will flare up, the sores will return, and every single time, it will be a physical reminder that someone he loved and trusted chose to hurt him through silence. That's a permanent scar on a permanent friendship, and the show presents both as things that simply have to be lived with. Herpy the Love Sore used body horror and betrayal to make the audience physically recoil. But the next episode on our list doesn't need graphic imagery or disgusting visuals to be terrifying. It just needs one scene. One moment where a character stands up for herself for the first time in her life, and the show tells her to sit back down and keep taking the abuse because the family can't function without a punching bag. Seahorse Seashell Party from Season 10 is set during a hurricane. The Griffin family is trapped inside their house, with nowhere to go and nothing to do except be around each other. For most of the family, this is an inconvenience. For Meg, it becomes something else entirely. There are two main plot lines in this episode. One involves Brian eating psychedelic mushrooms and going on a drug trip that produces some of the most surreal and frightening imagery the show has ever animated. His hallucinations are genuinely disturbing, all warping colours and melting faces, and the kind of visual distortion that makes you feel like you're losing your grip on reality along with him. It's a sequence that would be at home in a horror film, and the show commits to it fully, letting Brian spiral into a nightmare while the rest of the family ignores him. But that's not why this episode is on the list. This episode is here because of what happens to Meg. Meg Griffin has been the family's punching bag since the very first episode. Peter calls her ugly, Lois dismisses her, Chris bullies her, even Stewie treats her with contempt. The show has built an entire comedic identity around the idea that Meg is worthless. that she's the one Griffin who doesn't matter, that her only function in the family is to absorb the cruelty that everyone else dishes out. It's been a running gag for years, and most of the audience has laughed at it because that's how the show frames it, as a joke, as something Meg deserves, because she's Meg. In Seahorse Seashell Party, Meg stops laughing. The hurricane has the family trapped together, and something in Meg snaps. She starts talking, really talking, not mumbling excuses or taking abuse quietly like she usually does. She confronts every single member of her family, one by one, with specific examples of how they've treated her. She tells Peter that he's a terrible father who has made her feel worthless her entire life. She tells Lois that she's a terrible mother who prioritizes her own vanity and selfishness over her daughter's well-being. She tells Chris exactly what she thinks of him. Every grievance she's been swallowing for years comes pouring out, and it's devastating. What makes the speech so powerful is the specificity. Meg doesn't deal in vague accusations. She has receipts. She tells Peter about specific moments where he humiliated her. She tells Lois about specific times she was ignored or dismissed. She catalogues the abuse with the precision of someone who has been keeping track for years, mentally logging every insult and every slight, and every time she was made to feel like she didn't matter. The speech isn't rage, it's evidence, and the evidence is overwhelming. Mila Kunis's voice performance in this scene is arguably the best work she's ever done on the show. There's a tremor in Meg's voice that suggests years of suppressed emotion finally breaking through the surface. She's not screaming, she's not crying, she's just talking, steadily and clearly, laying out the case for why her family has failed her. And that calmness is what makes it so devastating. If Meg was screaming, the family could dismiss it as a tantrum. If she were crying, they could write it off as melodrama. But she's just stating facts, calmly and methodically. And every fact is a knife. The family can't deflect, they can't minimize. They can only sit there and listen to the truth about who they are. The family falls apart. Peter starts crying. Lois has a breakdown. Chris can't handle the truth about himself. The carefully constructed dysfunction that holds the Griffin household together starts crumbling the moment someone actually challenges it. And for a few minutes, it feels like the show is finally doing something meaningful. It feels like Meg is going to get the moment she deserves. The moment where the family acknowledges that they've been awful to her and promises to do better. But that's not what happens. What happens instead is that Meg watches her family crumble and makes a decision. She goes to Brian, who is still recovering from his drug trip, and tells him that she's realised something. The family needs someone to dump on. Without a scapegoat, they turn on each other and fall apart. Her role in the family, the role she's been playing since birth, is to absorb all the negativity so that everyone else can function. And she's going to keep doing it. She's going to go back to being the punching bag. Not because she wants to, but because she believes the family can't survive without her suffering. And the show presents this as noble, not as a tragedy, not as a horrifying commentary on how abuse victims are conditioned to accept their own mistreatment. The show frames Meg's decision as a sacrifice, a mature, selfless choice made by someone who understands the bigger picture. She's choosing to keep suffering so her family can keep being happy. And the episode treats that like the right answer. Think about what this episode is actually saying. It's saying that if you're being abused and the people abusing you would fall apart without someone to mistreat, then it's your responsibility to keep taking the abuse. It's saying that the victim's needs are less important than the abuser's stability. It's saying that standing up for yourself is selfish if the people hurting you depend on your compliance. Critics destroyed this message. One of the most prominent Family Guy reviewers called the moral actually dangerous. And they're right, because this isn't an abstract thought experiment. There are people watching this episode who are in abusive relationships, who are being mistreated by their families, who have been told, explicitly or implicitly, that they need to keep accepting the abuse because it's their role, because the family needs them to, because things would be worse if they fought back. And Family Guy just told them that yes, that's exactly what they should do. Smile and take it. The contrast with screams of silence makes it even worse. In that episode, Quagmire kills his sister's abuser because abuse is wrong and victims deserve to be free. In this episode, the show tells its most abused character to voluntarily return to her abuser because the family structure depends on it. These two messages are completely incompatible. Either abuse is wrong and should be stopped, or abuse is a necessary function that someone has to perform for the greater good. You can't have it both ways. What makes Seahorse Seashell Party genuinely terrifying isn't the drug trip, although that's visually disturbing. It's not the hurricane. It's not even Meg's speech, although that's the most emotionally raw thing the show has ever done. What's terrifying is the lesson, the message that the show delivers with a straight face to millions of viewers. That if you're the one being hurt, it's your job to keep being hurt. That your suffering is what holds everyone else together. That the right thing to do is go back to the people who break you and let them keep breaking you. That's not cartoon horror. That's not body horror or supernatural horror or psychological thriller horror. That's real-world, applicable, dangerous horror. The kind that sticks with you not because of what you saw on screen, but because of what the screen told you about how the world works. And Family Guy delivered it in 22 minutes, wrapped it in a hurricane and a drug trip, and moved on to the next episode like nothing happened. The Brian drug trip subplot deserves more attention on its own merits as horror, because the visuals the show produces during his hallucination sequence are some of the most artistically ambitious and genuinely frightening things Family Guy has ever animated. When the mushrooms take hold, Brian's reality doesn't just distort, it collapses. The walls of the Griffin house melt, the furniture breathes, the family's faces split and recombine into new configurations that shouldn't exist. Colours bleed out of objects and pool on the floor like liquid. At one point, Brian looks at his own paws and watches them dissolve into fractals that spiral inward forever. The animators clearly studied real psychedelic art and real accounts of bad trips to create this sequence, because the horror doesn't come from monsters or jump scares. It comes from the loss of stable reality. Brian can't trust his own senses. He can't tell what's real and what's the drug. He reaches for something solid and it liquefies in his hands. He tries to speak and the words come out as colours. The sequence taps into a fear that's more primal than any slasher villain. The fear that reality itself is unreliable, that the floor might not hold, that the walls might not stay, that the face looking back at you in the mirror might not be yours. In any other episode, this would be the main talking point. Brian's drug trip is, from a pure animation and artistic standpoint, one of the most impressive things the show has ever created, but it's completely overshadowed by what Meg does in the other plotline. And that says something about where the real power of this episode lies. A visually stunning psychedelic nightmare can't compete with a teenage girl finally telling her family the truth about how they've treated her. The animation is technically remarkable, but the words are devastating, and devastation beats spectacle every single time. Seahorse Seashell Party told abuse victims to keep suffering for the comfort of their abusers, and that makes it one of the most genuinely horrifying episodes in the show's history. Not because of what it showed, but because of what it said. But for our final episode, we're leaving the moral debates and emotional gut punches behind. We're going somewhere the show has rarely gone with such commitment. Full-on slasher movie territory, with masked killers, chase sequences through the woods, and the kind of horror that makes you forget you're watching an animated comedy. A Little Fright Music is the Season 24 premiere, a Halloween special that aired in October 2025. And what makes it remarkable is that after 24 seasons And over 400 episodes, Family Guy is still finding new ways to scare its audience. This isn't a show coasting on past glory or recycling old tricks. This episode proves that the writers are still willing to commit to genuine horror when the occasion calls for it. The episode has two storylines running in parallel. Stewie and Brian decide to write a Halloween song together after Stewie hears Monster Mash for the 100th time and decides the world needs something better. It's a fun, light-hearted premise that lets the two of them bounce off each other, the way they always do. Stewie gets way too deep into the songwriter lifestyle. Brian gets frustrated and wants to bail. Classic duo dynamics. But the other storyline is where things get dark. Lois tells Chris he has to stay home and hand out candy on Halloween night. Chris doesn't want to. He wants to go trick-or-treating. And Peter, being Peter, decides that the solution is to sneak Chris out of the house and go trick-or-treating outside of town where Lois won't find out. He recruits Cleveland, Joe, and Quagmire to come along, and the five of them hit the road on Halloween night, telling their wives they're going to a game. So far, so standard. Peter doing something dumb and dragging his friends into it. Classic Family Guy setup. You're expecting hijinks. You're expecting gags about middle-aged men in costumes fighting kids for candy. You're expecting Peter to get stuck in something, or break something, or say something inappropriate that gets them all in trouble. Instead, you get serial killers. They're driving down a dark road when masked figures appear out of nowhere. Not cartoon masked figures, not goofy Halloween costumes. These are slasher movie killers, dark clothes, expressionless masks, the kind of silent, menacing presence that horror films have been using to terrify audiences for decades. They appear in the headlights, and the car screeches to a halt, and suddenly everyone in the vehicle knows that something is very, very wrong. The guys run. That's the instinct, and the show honours it. They don't make jokes. They don't stand their ground and crack wise. They run through the woods in the dark, stumbling over roots and crashing through branches, with masked figures pursuing them through the trees. The pacing is pure horror movie. Quick cuts, heavy breathing. The sound of footsteps behind them getting closer. Shadows moving between the trees in ways that shouldn't be possible. They find a cottage in the woods. Because of course there's a cottage in the woods. Every horror movie has a cottage in the woods, and Family Guy knows this and leans into it completely. The guys pile inside, barricade the door, and try to catch their breath. They're terrified. Legitimately terrified. Peter, who is rarely shown as genuinely afraid of anything, is shaking. Chris is beside himself. Cleveland, Joe, and Quagmire are all running scenarios in their heads about how this ends. A figure appears inside the cottage. Someone was already there. They're offered hot chocolate, which seems like a reprieve until the chocolate turns out to be drugged. One by one, the guys lose consciousness. The camera stays on Peter as his vision blurs, and the last thing he sees before passing out is a masked figure standing over him. When they come to, they're restrained. The killers are circling them, and Peter, faced with what he genuinely believes is the end of his life, does something the show almost never lets him do. He's honest. He tells the group he's sorry for lying to Lois. He's sorry for dragging Chris into this. He expresses real, unfiltered remorse for the decisions that led them to this moment. It's a rare Peter Griffin moment of emotional clarity, the kind that only surfaces when the character believes he's about to die. Then the masks come off. It's Lois and Bonnie and Donna, the wives. They figured out that the guys snuck away. They pooled their resources. They planned and executed an elaborate horror movie prank designed to teach their husbands a lesson they'd never forget. The serial killers in the woods, the cottage, the drugged hot chocolate, all of it was staged. And in one way, the twist is a relief. Nobody's actually in danger. Nobody's going to die. The guys are safe and the audience can exhale. But in another way, the twist adds its own layer of horror. Because think about what the wives actually did. They planned psychological torture. They let their husbands believe they were going to be murdered. They watched Peter cry and apologize and think he was living his final moments. And they did that on purpose, as punishment for a lie about trick-or-treating. The prank worked. The guys are genuinely traumatized. Peter's emotional confession was real, even if the threat wasn't. And the wives reveal that the whole thing was Lois's idea, that she did it because setting up the prank restored her Halloween spirit. She engineered a night of genuine terror for the people she loves because she wanted to feel festive. A Little Fright Music is Family Guy in 2025, and it shows a show that still understands how to use horror effectively. The woods chase sequence is genuinely scary. The cottage is genuinely claustrophobic. Peter's confession is genuinely emotional. And the twist, while comedic, carries an unsettling subtext about how far people will go to make a point, even to the people they love. The episode also marks something interesting about where Family Guy sits in the landscape of animated horror. SpongeBob has Creepaway Camp. The Simpsons has its annual Treehouse of Horror specials. But Family Guy's approach to horror has always been different. It doesn't rely on monsters or supernatural threats. Its scariest episodes are scary because they're grounded in recognizable human behavior. Abuse, neglect, guilt, betrayal. The things that actually terrify people in their real lives, translated into a medium that most viewers approach with their guard down. A Little Fright Music captures all of that in a single Halloween night. The fear of being hunted, the regret of poor decisions, the vulnerability of being caught in a lie, and the uncomfortable realization that the people who love you the most are also the people who know exactly how to hurt you. There's one more thing about A Little Fright Music that deserves attention, and that's how it positions Family Guy within the evolving landscape of adult animated horror in 2025. When the show debuted in 1999, the idea of an animated comedy doing genuine horror was practically unheard of. The Simpsons had Treehouse of Horror, but those were always clearly labelled as non-canon Halloween specials, where the rules didn't apply. South Park pushed boundaries, but its intentionally crude animation style kept everything at a safe, ironic distance. Family Guy was one of the first animated comedies to blend horror into its regular episodes. To make the scary stuff count, to have consequences that carried over into the next week and the week after that. 26 years later, the landscape has completely changed. Bob's Burgers does Halloween episodes. Archer has done horror arcs. Rick and Morty regularly ventures into genuinely disturbing territory. Even SpongeBob, a children's show, has produced episodes like Creepaway Camp that lean hard into slasher film conventions. The animation world caught up to what Family Guy was doing, and in some ways surpassed it. But A Little Fright Music proves that Family Guy still has something the others don't: institutional knowledge of its own characters. When Peter confesses his regret while drugged and restrained in a cabin, that moment carries the weight of 24 seasons of watching this man be reckless and thoughtless and destructive. When the wives reveal themselves as the orchestrators of the prank, that moment carries the weight of 2 decades of watching these marriages survive absurd levels of chaos and betrayal. The horror in A Little Fright Music isn't just about masked figures in the woods, it's about the accumulated history of these relationships being weaponized in a single night. No new show can replicate that. You can create compelling horror from the first episode, but you can't create the kind of horror that comes from knowing a character for 24 years and watching them be vulnerable in a way they've never been before. That's what long-running shows have that new shows don't. Not just history, but the audience's emotional investment in that history. When Peter cries in the cabin, the audience isn't just watching a character cry, they're watching a character they've known since 1999 reveal a part of himself that he's been hiding for their entire relationship. And that hits different. That hits harder. That's the kind of horror you can't fake, and it's the kind that only a show like Family Guy, with all of its flaws and contradictions, and 24 seasons of baggage, can deliver. And that brings us to the end. 13 episodes spanning 24 seasons of a show that has consistently proven it can be just as frightening as it is funny. Think about what we've just covered. An entire civilization collapsing while a narcissist takes control of the survivors. A baby with a rotting head wound being passed around by a family too selfish to take him to a hospital. A mother getting shot by her own infant son in a simulation that felt disturbingly real. A talking dog admitting he keeps a loaded gun in case he decides to end his own life. A murder mystery where characters are permanently killed off and never come back. A beloved family pet dying suddenly from a random car accident while the audience watches his family grieve. An abusive relationship depicted so realistically that critics couldn't agree on whether the show was helping or hurting. Santa Claus begging to be put out of his misery in a nightmarish factory staffed by inbred elves. 4 friends killing an innocent man and immediately trying to frame each other for the crime. A sexual predator becoming a victim of the exact behaviour he's been perpetrating for years. A baby permanently infected with herpes by his best friend who was too ashamed to be honest. A girl told by her own show that she should keep accepting abuse because her family needs a punching bag. And a group of husbands psychologically tortured by their wives as punishment for sneaking out on Halloween. None of these episodes involve ghosts or vampires or monsters hiding under the bed. Every single one of them is terrifying because of something fundamentally human. Cruelty, selfishness, guilt, betrayal, the willingness to hurt the people closest to you, the capacity for violence that exists in ordinary people when they're pushed far enough. Family Guy wraps all of this in animation and crude humour, but every once in a while it strips the jokes away and forces you to look at what's actually there. And what's there is enough to keep you up at night. What makes Family Guy's scariest episodes hit so hard is the element of surprise. You don't sit down to watch this show expecting to feel genuine fear or genuine sadness. You sit down expecting fart jokes and Conway Twitty and Peter fighting the chicken in an increasingly elaborate sequence of destruction. Your guard is completely down, and then the show slides something truly dark under the door. And by the time you realise what you're watching, it's too late. The scene is already burned into your memory. The emotion has already hit. And you're sitting there at 2 a.m. wondering how a show about a fat guy from Rhode Island just made you feel something that real. That's the genius of it. That's why Family Guy's dark episodes work better than most dedicated horror shows. Because the horror comes from a place you never expect. And the best horror always does. There's a pattern to how Family Guy deploys its horror, and once you see it, you can't unsee it. The show spends weeks, sometimes months, sometimes years, training you to see these characters one way. Peter is the funny fat guy. Quagmire is the horn dog next door. Stewie is the cute evil baby. Brian is the pretentious liberal dog. Meg is the punching bag. These identities are reinforced episode after episode, through gags and cutaways, and running jokes until they feel permanent. Until you think you know exactly who these people are. And then the show pulls the rug out. Peter isn't just the funny fat guy. He's a man capable of burying a body and framing his best friend. Quagmire isn't just the horn dog. He's a predator who becomes a victim the moment someone treats him the way he treats others. Stewie isn't just a cute baby playing at villainy. He's a genuinely dangerous person who has simulated murdering his entire family and filed the results away for future reference. Brian isn't just a pretentious dog. He's a depressed, suicidal animal who keeps a loaded gun as his emergency exit from a life he can't stand. And Meg isn't just a punching bag. She's a human being who has been systematically destroyed by the people who are supposed to love her, and the show itself has told her to keep taking it. Every terrifying episode of Family Guy works because it reveals the truth behind the joke. It shows you what the comedy has been hiding, and what it's been hiding, in every case, is something real and something painful. The abuse was always there. The depression was always there. The capacity for violence was always there. The comedy was just a convenient way to keep everyone from looking at it too closely. That's why these episodes stay with people, not because of the blood or the gross-out visuals or the shock value. Those elements are there, and they're effective, but they're not why people are still talking about these episodes, years and sometimes decades after they aired. People remember these episodes because they saw something true inside the cartoon. They recognised the neglect in Brian Griffin's House of Pain because they've seen families that work exactly like that. They recognised the guilt in Peter Normal Activity because they felt that kind of fear after making a terrible mistake. They recognised the abuse in Seahorse Seashell Party because they've been Meg, or they know someone who has. Family Guy isn't a horror show. It never will be. It's a comedy that occasionally tells the truth, and sometimes the truth is horrifying. Sometimes the funniest show on television is also the most disturbing. Sometimes the same writers who give you a Conway Twitty cutaway also give you a talking dog confessing that he wants to die. And the genius, the real genius, is that both of those things exist in the same show, sometimes in the same episode, and somehow it all works. Because life is like that. Life is funny and horrifying at the same time. And the shows that understand that, the shows that can hold both of those realities in the same hand, are the ones that stay with you. Family Guy has been on the air for 26 years. It's been cancelled, it's been revived, it's been praised and condemned and memed and merchandised and debated endlessly. And through all of it, it has never stopped being willing to go to places that make people uncomfortable. That willingness is the source of its best comedy and its best horror, because both come from the same place. A refusal to look away from the things that most shows and most people would rather pretend don't exist. If you enjoyed this deep dive, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you don't miss our next video. Drop a comment letting us know which Family Guy episode scared you the most. Everyone seems to have that one episode that stuck with them, the one they watched once and couldn't stop thinking about. We want to hear which one was yours. And if you haven't already, check out our video on the most terrifying episodes of SpongeBob SquarePants. Turns out kids' cartoons and adult animation have more in common than you'd think when it comes to genuine horror. Until next time.